The sky had gone quiet again, like it often did out past the known edge of Bramble Creek, where fences curled like broken ribs through snow, and the world forgot how to speak. He walked with the hush of a bear too tired to growl, barefoot over ice-packed ground, shirtless despite the bitter Wyoming wind that peeled the skin from lesser men. Elias Boone carried firewood over one shoulder like a cross he never asked to bear. His breath fogged but didn't quiver, and the bones of his back were corded with stories no one had the courage to ask about. The man didn't come into town much anymore. Not since the whispers got crueler than the silence. They said his wife ran screaming from the Boone place. Said their baby never breathed. Said Elias had gone strange in the head after that, speaking to ghosts and chopping wood through lightning storms. But none of that mattered out here. What mattered was the column of smoke rising from the ridge cabin, thin, gray, desperate. Elias paused, narrowed his eyes. That cabin hadn't had life in it since the Worthing boy died last fall. Which meant whoever was inside it now had come to it like a grave. Maybe to freeze, maybe to forget. He turned, trudging toward the scent of ash and iron. It was the second week of deep snow. Even the crows were hungry enough to leave tracks. When he reached the clearing, the sight stopped him. A woman. Small. Slender, but in that hollowed way, like a peach left too long in frost. Pale hands red and raw against the axe handle. She swung it wrong, awkward, splitting logs more out of prayer than technique. Her braid had fallen, hair like golden thread gone dull with grief. She wasn't crying, but something in her eyes said she would have given a quiet corner. She saw him. Froze mid-swing. He didn't speak. Just dropped the wood at her feet. "Don't need help," she said, voice thin and dry, cracking like thawed ice. Her lips were chapped near bleeding. "Don't need you." Still, he stood there a beat longer. Snowflakes settled in his beard. She looked down again and resumed chopping, wobbling on the downstroke. Her knees shook with exhaustion. He watched her split 3 more logs, badly, before turning to leave. When she stepped inside that night, her breath caught. On the stump outside her door was a bundle wrapped in burlap. Inside, a haunch of venison, smoked and cut clean. No note. No footprints either. Wind had already erased the trail. Edith May Worthing had been alone for 3 weeks. Or longer, if you counted the months before her husband died. Or the moment his mother said, after the miscarriage, "You ain't no kin to us now." Threw her out with little more than a quilt and a tin pot. She had come here to survive. Maybe. Or disappear. Now someone knew she hadn't vanished. Someone had seen her bleeding fingers, the frostbite beneath her nails. Someone had given. She ate that night slow. Reverent. Like the meat was communion. Elias Boone didn't sleep in a bed anymore. Not since he'd burned the crib with the baby blanket still inside. Not since the house echoed like a cathedral full of regret. He laid on floorboards beside the stove, watching shadows flicker like memories. He wasn't sure why he'd helped her. He didn't like women with eyes that looked too far inward. They reminded him of his own mirror. But something in her refusal struck him deep. That stubborn will to stay upright when the wind came howling. He recognized it. Knew what it cost. He stayed away the next day. And the next. Let the storm talk louder than his feet ever would. Then, on the 4th morning, he went again. Edith was kneeling in the snow this time, trying to rethatch the chicken coop roof with shaking arms. The birds inside were quiet, huddled like secrets. Her cheeks were wet with either snow or tears, and she didn't look up. He didn't speak. Just began hammering the slats back into place. Her eyes flicked toward him but said nothing. She went inside. When he finished, he stacked more logs by her door. Walked away before she could say a word that might end the fragile thread between them. In town, old Etta Doyle saw him come through the square, snow still clinging to his boots and shoulders. She watched from her rocking chair, puffing pipe smoke like a train. "He's feeding that girl," she muttered to the grocer. "Like a bear leaving meat on the porch." The grocer grunted. "Hope she don't fall for him. He's half wild." "Better wild than the ones who smile and do worse," Etta said, eyes narrowing. Edith heard the rumors the next time she limped into town. Needing salt, needing flour, needing not to starve. But what she got were stares. Whispers wrapped in sugar. "She's moved on awful quick, ain't she? Guess being a widow makes a woman bold." One man leaned in near her ear as she paid. "Heard Boone's shirtless all the time. Must be nice, keepin' you warm." She dropped the flower. Outside, the wind howled. She cried there, behind the stable, where no one could see her except God. She almost didn't go back. Almost let the snow take her. But that night, just before dusk, she opened the door and found a folded flannel shirt on the porch. A new one. Thick and lined with wool. Beneath it, wrapped in brown paper, a cotton dress, blue, the exact shade of dusk. She pressed the fabric to her face and wept. Not because she was in love. Not because she owed him. But because someone, after all that had been taken, still thought she was worth warmth. Elias Boone sat that night by his dying stove, shirtless again, arms crossed over his chest like a man waiting for punishment. He didn't know why he bought the dress, or how he remembered her size. But he'd seen the way townfolk had looked at her. The weight in her shoulders. The silence behind her eyes. He knew what it was to be looked at like a rumor. When he closed his eyes he saw her again, chopping wood with hands cracked to blood, too proud to ask for anything. It was then, under that orange stove glow, that a thought flickered across the quiet of his mind. Maybe it ain't just the body that needs saving. Maybe it's the soul that freezes first. And outside, the snow kept falling, soft, slow, forgiving. Like it was trying to teach the world how to be gentle again. The town of Bramble Creek didn't need a newspaper. It had porches and rocking chairs, spinsters who sharpened stories like paring knives, and old men who spit judgment between gulps of whiskey. The wind might carry snow through the valley, but gossip settled heavier, stacking on rooftops, seeping through keyholes, cracking hearts like frozen boards. It began with a boy, barely 13, sent to check the trapline out past the ridge. He came back wide-eyed, saying he saw Elias Boone chopping wood at the Worthing widow's place, shirtless as ever, hauling timber like some mountain god. Said there was a chicken coop fixed too, and smoke curling thick from her chimney, which hadn't been seen all winter. By dusk, the tale had gained teeth. By dawn, it had grown claws. Elias wasn't the type to defend himself. His silence made room for their imaginations. And Edith May? She'd walked into the mercantile once in the past week, coat too thin, shoes too worn, eyes too soft. She didn't deny the rumors, didn't even look up when they swirled around her like sawdust in a sunbeam. So the story formed its own shape. "She's lettin' him stay up there at night," said a ranch hand to his drinking buddy. "He's the father of her dead baby, I heard," another added. "Never mind the timeline. Wouldn't put it past Boone to keep a woman locked in. Or her to open her legs for a little meat and timber," said a woman too bitter for her own good. Etta Doyle heard it all. Sat in her usual place outside the apothecary, smoking a pipe like she had lungs made of stone. She didn't speak much, but when she did, folks listened. So when she murmured, "She's grieving, and he's grieving louder than most know how to bear," it carried like scripture. Still, the whispers outpaced her wisdom. Edith came back into town 2 days later with a torn glove and 1 silver coin. She needed salt and thread. The floorboards in her cabin were splitting. She kept her eyes on the shelf, shoulders hunched beneath judgment. Behind her, women pretended not to stare. One whispered, "That's the dress he gave her." Another replied, "Blue's the color of sin now?" Edith felt the words like needles through cotton. She didn't flinch, didn't turn, just moved quietly, like prey trying not to draw breath in the wrong rhythm. She paid. The coins shook in her hand, not from cold, but from shame. Outside, the clouds hung low. Gray. Heavy. Like they too had something to say. She didn't make it past the blacksmith's shop before someone spit near her boots. "You forget your mourning period?" A voice growled. She didn't answer. Couldn't. That night, she tried to light her stove and found the firewood gone wet. The storm had crept in through the window frame. Her hands bled from trying to carve kindling with a dull knife. She wept without sound. Not because of the cold, but because she'd survived so much already, and still the world found new ways to punish her for breathing. When morning broke, she opened the door and paused. A new pile of firewood. Dry. Stacked with care. Beside it, wrapped in oilskin, was a small tin of salve and a pair of leather gloves. Worn, but soft. Mended by hand. She pressed the gloves to her cheek. Then she sank to the floor, back against the door, and whispered, "Why do you keep doing this?" But the wind didn't answer. And Elias hadn't left footprints again. Miles away, Elias Boone sat in his empty shack, staring at the rope he used to bind hay bales. It had been a long time since he'd considered its other use. Since he'd come that close. But her eyes, Edith's eyes, had made something shift. Not like a fire. More like thaw. Slow, reluctant, real. He remembered how she looked standing in that blue dress. The way she held herself like it still might be taken from her. Elias didn't want her. Not like the town claimed. He wanted something else entirely. Something he couldn't name. Maybe it was peace. Maybe it was forgiveness. Maybe it was just the need to prove he wasn't what they said he was. By the time the snow began again, Edith knew they'd never stop whispering. When she walked into the church that Sunday, the pews quieted like a gasp held too long. She wore a shawl Elias had left behind. Nothing fancy, just thick wool and well-loved. But in Bramble Creek, even kindness could be mistaken for scandal. The preacher paused mid-sentence when he saw her. His sermon turned to repentance. "Women ought to conduct themselves with modesty, as befits the Lord," he said, eyes grazing her face like a judgment passed from on high. Edith stared at the wood grain in the floor. After service, no one spoke to her. Etta Doyle watched from her cane-backed chair at the edge of the room. She puffed once, then twice, then stood with effort and made her way to Edith's side. "You walk on, girl," she said, loud enough for all to hear. "You walk straight. Let them stare. Most of these folks never knew sorrow deep enough to teach them decency." Edith looked up, really looked, and something in her cracked. Not into pieces, but open. She nodded. Once. Etta turned toward the room, lit her pipe again, and muttered, "They like their women dead or invisible. Anything else scares them." That night, Elias didn't come. Edith waited at the door for hours, listening to the howl of wind and her own heartbeat. When she finally slept, it was with the gloves on her hands and the shawl around her shoulders. But the next morning, on her porch sat something new. A book. Water-warped but still readable. Inside, scribbled in clumsy pencil, was a note. "You said you liked to read. Thought this one had pretty words." No name. No signature. Just a pressed flower between the pages. It wasn't a duodecision. Not a promise. But it was the first sentence of something not yet ruined. And in the sky above Bramble Creek, the clouds finally broke. For a moment, just a moment, the sun poured down like gold across snow. That moment didn't last long. But it was enough. The snow didn't stop that week. It came in waves, heavy, breathless, sealing the world in white. Roads vanished. Footpaths blurred. Even sound fell quiet, muffled under the weight of winter's hush. Edith sat by the window of her one-room cabin, hands folded in her lap, eyes unfocused. The salve had healed the worst of the cracks, but the skin still ached from cold and use. The blue dress hung by the stove to dry, washed carefully by hand, like it was holy. She wore the shawl now, not out of defiance but necessity, and something gentler, something like gratitude. Her pantry was almost bare again. She hadn't seen Elias in days. A flicker of wind rattled the glass. Then a knock, 3 dull thuds, slow and deep. She opened the door, and there he stood. Elias Boone, 6.5 feet of snow-dusted silence, hair damp from the storm. Shirtless still, though he carried a blanket over one shoulder, and a sack of something that clinked like tin. "You'll freeze," she whispered, stepping aside. "I won't," he answered, voice like gravel warmed in coals. He walked in with a nod, not looking at her, not speaking more than he needed. He laid the blanket by the stove, unwrapped the sack. Beans, biscuits, dried apples, coffee. Then he paused. "I'll stay. Just till it blows over." She wanted to say no. Or maybe yes. But the wind answered for her, slamming the door shut behind him, like it had a stake in the outcome. So he stayed. The room wasn't big enough for two. Not comfortably. But neither of them needed comfort. They needed warmth. Survival. Breath. He sat on the floor by the stove, back against the wall, arms crossed over his chest. She brewed coffee, poured it into two mismatched cups. When she handed his over, their fingers brushed, brief, unplanned. The contact lingered in the air, wordless and warm. Neither spoke for a long while. The storm howled. Logs popped. The fire swayed inside. "You always walk around with no shirt?" she asked finally, voice soft. "Hot-blooded," he said. She snorted, then covered her mouth like she'd broken something sacred. But he smiled, just barely, and it wasn't mocking. It was the kind of smile that made her feel seen, but not exposed. "I've never had someone bring me food just 'cause they noticed I was hungry," she said. "I never had someone eat it like it mattered who brought it," he replied. Their eyes met across the fire. Then both looked away. She rose and began mending a torn sock, hands steady now, movements almost elegant. He watched the needle glint, the thread tug and disappear. "Do you miss her?" Edith asked. He didn't ask who. He didn't need to. "She died before she left," he said after a pause. "The losing started long before the end." She nodded. "Understood. My husband got on a horse one day and never came back," she said. "They say he died clean. But I don't believe in clean deaths anymore." He shifted slightly, resting his arm along the floorboards. "I named our son," he said. "Didn't tell nobody. Elijah. He was too small. Still. Cold like the snow." "I didn't name mine," she whispered. "They wouldn't let me see her. Said it'd make things worse." He looked at her then. Full on. "Did it?" "No," she said. Not seeing her did. The fire between them flickered, then flared. Outside, the storm thickened, but inside, the air had changed. He got up without warning, and began repairing the broken window latch. Not for thanks. Just because it needed doing. She watched the way his hands worked. Rough but careful. Like they remembered how to cradle something delicate, even if they hadn't done it in a long time. When he was done, she handed him a bowl of stew. He ate slowly, chewing like each bite was a kind of reverence. "Town folk say things," she said, watching the flames. "They think you're staying here for reasons." "I know," he said. She waited. He didn't elaborate. "Do you care?" "No," he said. "Do you?" "I did," she admitted. "But not right now." That night, he unrolled the blanket and lay on the floor again, by the fire. She blew out the lantern, curled beneath her quilt on the bed. For a long time, they listened to the snow pressing against the cabin walls like 1,000 muffled hands. "In the dark," she said. "You could have taken advantage." "I know." "You didn't." "I know." She didn't know what else to say. So she said, "Thank you." He didn't respond. Not right away. Then came the quiet. "I didn't come here to be good. I came here to be near something that wasn't dying." She bit her lip, turned her face to the wall. Let the heat of the fire and his words fill the spaces between the boards, between her ribs. When she woke in the gray stillness of morning, the fire was out. Elias was gone. She wrapped the shawl tight and opened the door. Outside, the snow had stopped. In the clearing, fresh footprints led to the woods. And by the stump set gently were 6 perfect logs, split clean and stacked like a promise. No note. No voice. Just the sound of wood and wind, and the long silence of a man who left only what he meant to give. She knelt beside the pile, pressed a gloved hand to the top log, and felt the warmth it still carried. The storm had passed. But something else had settled. Something deeper. Not love. Not yet. But the fire between them was no longer just for heat. The thaw came slowly, not just to the land but to the hearts still frozen in the town of Bramble Creek. Streams cracked open like old wounds, birds returned to perch on crooked fences, and snow melted from rooftops. But the town's tongues stayed sharp and their memories long. By the time Edith May ventured back into town, the trail was slush and mud. She wore the blue dress again, not to provoke but because it fit now. not just her shape, but her courage. She walked straighter. Looked people in the eye. It didn't save her. Outside the blacksmith's, she found the word carved into the wood of her wagon. Whore. It was jagged. Angry. Fresh. She didn't cry. Not this time. She stood there for a long moment, tracing the letters with her eyes, not her hand, as if touching it would make it true. Behind her, someone snorted. Looks like Elias Boone ain't picky. Wouldn't expect better from a girl with no name left. Edith turned, slow. Met their faces. 3 men, 1 woman, none brave enough to look her back in the eye. She didn't speak. Just walked on. But her spine burned with shame. At the mercantile, the shopkeep rang up her flour, her salt, and her buttons with a sniff. Your kind oughta use the back door, he muttered. Edith placed each coin down one by one. What kind is that? He didn't answer. Outside, the sun caught her hair and made it glow like honey. And still, she felt filthy. She didn't go home right away. She went to Etta Doyle. The old midwife opened the door and leaned on her cane, eyes sharp as a crow's. You're here to cry, or to rise? She asked. Edith looked down at her shoes. I don't know how to do the second. Then sit. I'll show you. Etta poured coffee and laid out tobacco, then pointed to a chair worn hollow by years of confessions. She didn't coddle. Didn't soothe. She simply listened. They call me things, Edith whispered. They think I've earned them. Etta took a long drag, let it curl in the air. You know why people talk, girl? Because they're cruel? Because they're bored. And bored people will burn saints just to warm their hands. Edith felt the words settle in her ribs. I never touched Elias, she said. Etta gave a short laugh. That man don't give his shirt away for nothing. You think he's out here hand-stitching gifts for women he's betting? Edith blinked. He stitched that shirt? And the dress. Came to me for thread. Didn't know how to sew proper, but learned. Edith's throat tightened. Why would he do that? Etta looked at her like the answer should be obvious. Because he don't see a woman who's fallen. He sees one who stood back up. When Edith stepped outside, the sun had dipped behind the ridge, bleeding pink into the sky. She walked home with her head high. But trouble was waiting. Her husband's cousin, Merrill Worthing, stood on the edge of her property with 2 men and a rolled parchment. Their horses pawed the mud, impatient. You're trespassing, Edith said, voice flat. This land's mine now, Merrill replied, waving the paper. My uncle never filed it right. Sheriff signed it over this morning. Edith felt her knees go weak. You can't take this from me. Merrill smiled. You already gave it away. She reached for the axe by the door, but didn't need to. Elias stepped out of the trees, silent as always. No shirt. No coat. Just scars and muscle and frost steaming from his skin. He stood between her and the men without a word. Merrill shifted in the saddle. This ain't your land, Boone. Elias didn't blink. She got no claim, one of the other men said. Elias turned, walked into Edith's cabin, and came out holding a folded paper. Laid this down at the courthouse 2 weeks ago, he said, voice low, steady. Filed it proper. Paid for it in coin. Witnessed and signed. He handed it to Edith. She opened it. Stared. Her name. Her claim. Her right. I never filed, she whispered. You were busy staying alive, Elias said. Merrill's jaw clenched. You forged this. Etta's voice rang out from the path. He didn't. I witnessed it. And if you take one step onto this property again, I'll drag you into town myself and tell every woman you ever looked crooked at just what kind of man you are. The men didn't move. Then Elias stepped forward, slow and massive, and dropped an axe into the ground so hard the handle quivered. Merrill turned his horse. Ain't worth it. They rode off without another word. Edith watched them vanish into the trees, breath shaking. Then she turned to Elias. You went to Etta. You filed my papers. He didn't meet her gaze. Just nodded. Why? He rubbed the back of his neck. Seemed like someone should. She stepped closer. And the axe? His voice was softer now. Didn't want to hurt him. Just remind him I could. She laughed, sudden and cracked, and covered her mouth with her hands. I should be terrified of you, she said. You ain't, he replied. No, I ain't. She stood there, heart hammering, watching him like she was seeing him for the first time. And he watched her like a man who didn't know how to look for long, afraid it might change things. But it already had. Neither spoke again. The silence was full of things they weren't ready to say. By the time she stepped back inside, the sky was near black. On her table was the book he'd brought before, now worn at the spine. She opened it to the pressed flower. On the opposite page, she scribbled her name in soft ink. Not a signature. A duodithion. Outside, the wind had picked up again. But this time, it couldn't carry her away. The blizzard rolled in fast, wild and white, like a curtain drawn over the world, thick and breathless. It swallowed roads, smothered fences, blurred the sky into the earth. Trees groaned under the weight, and somewhere far off, a stallion screamed against the cold. Inside her cabin, Edith built the fire higher. The shutters rattled. The roof moaned. She tightened the shawl around her shoulders, heart pacing like hooves on frozen ground. Elias hadn't come. 3 days had passed since the land dispute. 3 days without a knock, without firewood on the stump or a wrapped bundle by the door. She told herself he was fine, that he'd said what needed saying and left it there. But tonight, she couldn't believe it. Tonight, her ribs ached with worry. She pulled on her boots, wrapped her coat twice, grabbed the lantern. Outside, the wind hit her like a slap. It stole her breath, clawed at her face, screamed in her ears. Still, she trudged forward, boots vanishing into snowdrifts with each step. The storm wanted her to turn back. But her body moved like it belonged to someone braver. She reached Elias's shack by dusk, though dusk barely existed beneath the storm. The door hung ajar. Snow had blown inside, covering the floor like dust in an abandoned church. The stove was cold. The bed untouched. She found him on the floor, curled by the hearth in a shivering heap, shirtless still, skin gone pale with cold. A feverish sweat beaded his brow, and when she touched his shoulder, he flinched. "Elias," she whispered, kneeling beside him. He stirred, lips cracked, eyes unfocused. "Edith. I'm here. Didn't want you to see me like this. You think I care?" She pulled the blanket from his cot and wrapped it around him tight. Then she hauled him up with a strength she didn't know she had and dragged him to her cabin, one staggering step at a time. Snow howled and stung her eyes, but she kept going. His weight leaned on her like guilt and silence, and the kind of pain that doesn't scream, it lingers. By the time she got him inside, her fingers had gone numb. She laid him by the stove, fed the fire like a woman possessed, and peeled the damp blanket from his back. He was burning up now, his body swinging from ice to flame. He mumbled in fever, his words broken and childlike. "Let me stay." She knelt beside him, wrung out a rag for his brow. "I'll work. I'll build. I'll even get you pregnant again." Her breath caught. He wasn't begging for lust. The words were raw and fractured, soaked in sorrow and something gentler, something like hope. He was offering to plant life in a place that had only known death. Offering her a future, not just a body. She pressed her palm to his chest. "You don't owe me that." His eyes fluttered open, red-rimmed and shining. "A man don't make an offer like that unless he means to stay forever." She didn't speak. Just brushed a curl from his damp temple, then leaned in and kissed his hand. Not his mouth. Not yet. That night, she didn't sleep. She watched him breathe, counted the rise and fall of his chest like it might stop if she looked away. By dawn, the fever broke. He woke to the smell of coffee, and her humming a tune without words. She stirred the pot with her hip leaning against the counter, sunlight warming her braid. When she turned and saw him awake, her smile was so quiet it felt like spring breaking through ice. "You dragged me through a blizzard?" he rasped. "You needed it." He looked around. "You should have let me freeze." She frowned. "Don't say that. I don't belong anywhere." "You do now." He sat up slow. Her shawl slid from his shoulders and onto the floor. He reached down to pick it up, then paused. His hand trembled. Not from weakness, but emotion. "I wanted to be enough," he said. "For someone. Just once. You are." They sat at the table, steam rising between them. She poured the coffee, and he took it with both hands like it might slip through if he didn't hold tight. "What do you want, Elias?" He met her eyes. Not with hunger. With reverence. "Not to leave." She nodded. "I won't ask you for love," he said. "Not now. But I'll build you a fence. A barn. I'll mend the roof. I'll fix the cradle if you want it. I'll fill this place with quiet." Edith reached for his hand. Held it. "Maybe quiet's all I've ever needed." Outside, the snow had begun to melt in rivulets down the pane. The earth was softening. By week's end, he'd cleared the yard, chopped 2 cords of wood, and patched the roof. She made him a shirt, stitched from an old dress, clumsy but warm. He wore it like armor. In town, Etta Doyle saw them walk by together. Not arm in arm. Just near. A closeness that didn't beg to be announced. The townsfolk whispered again, of course. But this time, Edith didn't bow her head. And Elias didn't hide his hands. Etta puffed her pipe and said to no one in particular, "That's what a home looks like. Not a house. A home." By the time spring came in earnest, Elias had built her a porch. She would sit there in the evenings, shawl draped over her shoulders, tea in hand, watching the sun sink into the pines. He would come from the field, shirt clinging to his back, boots muddy, eyes searching only for her. One night, she took his hand and placed it on her belly. He looked up at her, breath caught. "It's early," she said. "But I think this time, we're not alone." He didn't speak. He just knelt. Pressed his forehead to her palm like a man praying. In that silence, something bloomed. Not loud, not sudden but sure. Later, she would tell the child stories of the snow. Of a man who carried warmth in his hands. Of a storm that tried to bury love but failed. But for now, they simply sat. The fire crackled. The cradle waited. And 2 people who thought they'd been ruined found they were, in fact, still capable of building something whole. Now before you go, listen close. Some stories don't start with love. They begin with rejection. With shame. With someone too afraid to ask for a second chance. But they can still end in warmth, in worth, in the soft miracle of staying. If that touched something inside you. Now, click on the video on the screen to hear a story even more tender than this one. You'll feel it wrap around your heart like a shawl in winter. Click it. And take this warmth with you. I'll be waiting by the fire.